Welcome, friends. Welcome to today's podcast. The very first thing I would like to inform you is we have changed the name of the podcast. Earlier it was Bharat and Geopolitics. Now we have changed the podcast name to Global Focus by Hari Prakash Sinha. So, welcome to the podcast Global Focus by Hari Sinha. In today's episode, we will dive into the complex yet fascinating world of India's foreign policy and its evolving role in global affairs. India's positioning on the global stage has undergone a rapid transformation in recent years, driven by strategic moves, shifting alliances, and impactful diplomatic decisions. From the BRICS summit to the Indo-Pacific Alliance, each decision marks a shift in India's journey from being a regional player to an assertive voice of global geopolitics. Today, we have the privilege of welcoming our esteemed guest, Dr. Adityanjee, a renowned expert in foreign policy and international relations, whose work has offered a unique insight into India's geopolitical strategies and challenges. Dr. Adityanjee is the president of Council for Strategic Affairs. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Adityanjee. We are excited to hear your take on India's evolving foreign policy landscape and what lies ahead.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Sinha, for inviting me on your platform. And congratulations on revamped name of the podcast to Global Focus. I like that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. So I am coming to my first question, sir. For the past decade, actually, we have changed a lot of change. Actually, we have witnessed in India's foreign policy. It has become very assertive. So my first question today is India's non-aligned policy still relevant, or is it time for more clear-cut alliance strategy? So what do you say about it?
India's foreign policy has undergone significant change, not just from 2014, when the current government came into formation. Actually, you could see the change in 2013 itself.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, there was an incident in which an Indian diplomat was arrested in New York City. Her name was Devyani Khobragade.
Yes.
And that was, a violation of diplomatic immunity by a petty prosecutor, local prosecutor, who had his own political ambitions. And at that time, India did not take it lying down. There were tit for tat measures taken. In fact, the security parameter around US embassy was removed. And US was given very clear message that you cannot mess around with Indian diplomats, because there was, a lot of playing to the gallery, and it appeared that the diplomat was charged with abuse of a domestic servant or domestic help, but that domestic help had made pre-planned moves to apply for asylum in US, using her religion as the tool that she was being persecuted and all. So there was a unraveling of a plan by this particular person to use the sort of alleged domestic abuse as a way to get US visa. And India showed very assertive behavior at that time vis-a-vis US. So that was definitely transformation. And of course, in 2014, when the new government came, things started changing. And for next 5 years, there was not much change, although India was being more proactive towards looking to the East. or acting East. So there was more engagement. You saw this in invitation to SAARC leaders
Yeah.
during oath-taking ceremony, and India was trying to engage more in Asia.
Yes.
There was some critique initially in first 2 years that there was no engagement with quote unquote Muslim countries, and that changed because India's relationship with two countries, UAE and Saudi Arabia, suddenly improved very much, and they became, in a way, kind of strategic partners. India has jettisoned quote unquote non-aligned policy to what they call right now is multi-aligned policy, or I would say issue aligned policy. You are not quote unquote wedded to some grouping or some particular country. You have your national interests to guard. So India is just pro-India. India is aligned only to India's interests, nothing else. No ideological baggage.
Yes, sir.
So in that sense, yes, there's a change. The rhetoric about, against colonialism and imperialism and developing country and non-alignment is gone. I think the foreign policy is more level-headed.
Yeah.
It takes into consideration India's own strategic interests. And depending upon the issue, India has worked with different countries, whatever ideological baggage they may carry. On some issues, India is working with the United States. But despite United States exhortations, India has not, quote unquote, joined the unilateral sanctions on Russian Federation regarding the conflict in Ukraine. On certain issues, India has worked with China, but on the other hand, India has shown very assertive response to China on the LAC issue. So India is reawakening, realizing her own strength and guarding her own geostrategic issues by adopting a more assertive foreign policy, which is aligned to India's interests. That's all I would say.
Do you think, sir, India's rising defense budget is a necessity or this is a provocation?
Uh, India's budget has not risen to the extent it should have. Around in 2004, India's defense budget was around 25 billion US dollars. And China's defense budget was around 27, 28 US billion dollars. Today's, if you look at data from SIPRI, India's defense budget in 2023, 2024 was around 83 US billion dollars. Indian government figures are around 74 US billion dollars, whereas China's defense budget is 290 billion dollars. So you see in 15, 20 years, so much of asymmetry has come around between India and China defense budgets. If you look at US defense budget, it is around 920 or 980 billion dollars. Russian Federation's defense budget has increased tremendously because of war in Ukraine. It is around 109 US billion dollars. So yes, there is some increase in India's defense budget, but it is not commensurate with increase in defense budget of other three large, countries that have defense budgets higher than India's. India's defense budget is number 4. So if China's defense budget rises from $30 billion to $290 billion, and the understanding in the Western world is that owing to China's opaque system, that is an underestimate.
I'm very curious to ask you, how come the US and China we are able to go to this level, actually, this level of defense budget?
I think it depends upon the economy. The size of US economy is around $28 trillion. And with $980 billion, their defense budget is around 3.5%. China's economy is GDP is around $18 trillion. And in terms of proportion of GDP, it's only like 1.8% of their GDP, but it is $290 trillion. In India's case, it is around 2.5% of the GDP. India's GDP is around $3.9 trillion. So that is the crunch. You have to increase the GDP to be able to increase the defense budget. And India has to work on consolidating India's economy so that you can increase the defense budget and safeguard the strategic interests. Now, in contrast to India, Russian Federation's defense budget is around 5.9% at $109 billion. Russia's economy is much less than India's, but they are facing an existential crisis in Ukraine, where NATO is actually fighting a war against Russian Federation. So they have to put everything, including the kitchen sink, at the NATO. India is not in that situation. But ultimately, if you have to safeguard your independence, you have to increase defense budget, commensurate with increase in defense budget of your adversaries or potential adversaries, or even other potential threats, but you cannot act in vacuum. So economy has to improve.
I have an added question simultaneously. Increasing the GDP, what else India should do just to touch that level that the China and the US level?
So we have this Atmanirbhar Bharat.
Right.
Domestic manufacturing is very, very important. And in last 3 to 4 years, India has started to focus on domestic manufacturing. Previously, Indian economy was more service oriented, software, back office operations, things like that, or export of raw commodities. But manufactured goods were not there. So a strong focus and, at domestic manufacturing. And also in last 4 or 5 years, India has started to focus on defense exports, not just defense imports.
Right.
Previously, we were buying everything from abroad for our defense needs. Now we are starting to manufacture domestically. There's a negative list, that you cannot buy items from abroad for defense purposes. You have to outsource it to your defense companies. And there's a strong emphasis on PPP model, public-private partnership model. So around 15 years ago, there was hardly any defense manufacturers that were in private sector. Now there are, with government's backing. And of course, India's defense exports are going to 80 different countries. Here I would mention certain things. We do a lot of wastage. There's a lot of corruption in our economy that has to be eliminated.
Yeah.
There's a lot of freebie culture, distributing revenues, especially at the state level. That has to go. If we have to efficiently allocate our fiscal resources to various sectors, gradually the free distribution of power, free distribution of water, all these things have to be addressed. And that has to be addressed as a national policy issue. I think that is creating an imbalance.
Sorry to interrupt. There was a news in India today, in the 31 years, first time Delhi government budget is going in deficit.
Well, that is happening at state level. It's not just Delhi government budget. If you look at the state of Kerala budget or Karnataka budget or Himachal Pradesh budget, or for that matter, even West Bengal budget, they're all going into deficit, and they will keep on blaming the political adversaries, the central government, and all. But their own policies are lopsided. There's a lot of corruption, and of course, distributing freebies to buy votes, that has to change. In that sense, China does not have that problem because they hardly
Yes.
have free and fair elections. And in India, there are elections every 6 months. So there is need for reform domestically. I will also mention one particular issue. If you look at India's budget, yes, it is. If you look at the government figure, $74 billion, and if you look at the CIPRI figures, it is around $83 billion. Almost one third, almost 30.8% of that budget, goes to what? That goes to salaries and pensions, which is not really going on national defense. So I think one way of reforming that would be that the central government should have a department of central government pensions, central government employees pension, that should be a separate line item in the government budget. So all the central government employees, whether they are IS, AS, IFS, IRS officers or CGHS retirees, or for that matter, Defense Department
Yes,
retirees.
I'm going a bit off track, but I think this is important to discuss. One point I would like to mention, as we know, no country, no developed countries are willing to share their latest technology. Technology has to be developed on your own, actually. So the government,
There's no,
yes,
there's no doubt about it, because by increasing the size of your economy, you are able to have more capital lay for defense infrastructure.
yeah,
And once you have more capital overlay, you will be spending much more on R&D, whether in government sector or in private sector. India hardly spends money on R&D. So that has to change. We cannot be quote unquote, begging for technology transfer all the time. If you see the current situation, the problem with the United States, the GE, they are not supplying the GE 404 and 414 engines for the Tejas Mk2 version of the aircraft, and Indian Armed Forces is left with only 30 squadrons from an estimated 42 squadrons of fighter aircraft. So that is impacting the defense preparedness. Why that is happening? Because we can't actually manufacture our own fighter jet engines. So now we are looking at France for Safran, and we are looking for some European partners. But that has to change. You as a major economy, uh, fifth largest economy, should be able to manufacture
yeah,
and research and develop your own equipment.
yeah,
Unfortunately, this system of defense imports bred a lot of corruptions. So it made sense for bureaucrats, politicians, and defense officials to import stuff because there was a cut. Let's be very honest about it.
yeah.
So everyone got money, but the country got the raw deal.
So actually, at this point, considering everything is there, all the problem is there, challenges are there for the government. How much do you think government should overlay a budget for research and development in different sectors so that we should have, because what I feel, if the technology is good, this is cheaper actually.
In
So
the long run, it is cheaper to have your own equipment because you are not dependent on whims and fancies of foreign governments who, because of political reasons, can stop export or transfer of technology at any point in time, especially in time of wars. So if you have a strong defense manufacturing basis for all the equipment based on your indigent technology, I think nobody can stop you. I would say that at this point in time, if we change from 2.5% to 3.5% of defense to defense overlay
Yeah.
and remove the salaries and pensions from defense budget to just, central government pensions department or salaries department, so different line items. So defense budget is only for defense preparedness, not for hiring people and giving them pensions and giving them medical benefits. I'll give you the example in United States that $960 billion of defense budget does not include the budget of Department of Veterans Affairs. What does Defense Department of Veterans Affairs do? Well, they pay the pensions, the salaries, and medical benefits of retired soldiers and officers. So that's a totally separate budget. So you have to compare apples and apples, not apples and oranges. Uh, there is a dire need for India to invest in critical technologies domestically. It's not that the brains are not there. We have
Okay.
to create environment. We have to create environment by putting
Yeah.
resources where they are required. And we have seen that, if you look at the ISRO budget, it's very tiny, very small
Yeah.
overall.
Yeah.
But because of focus, dedication, they have been able to achieve with very small budget.
Yeah.
So we have to create institutions of excellence. We have to have, our partners in the private sector who are also willing to spend on R&D. And that has to be done as a national priority. I'm not saying it's not being done, but it needs to be done much more vigorously. And just I would say there is need for increasing the proportion of budgetary allocation from 2.47% to 3.5%. Now, people will become, on basis of ideology, wow, that's a muscular increase and that will provoke your neighbors and all. Uh, when you have to guard your nation, you have to take these kind of steps. There's a saying in Sanskrit, Shastrena Rakshite Rashtre Shastra Chinta Pravartate.
Yes, sir.
If your country is defended by the armaments, only then you can have deep philosophical discussions. We have previous historical example when the country was weak.
Yeah.
India went through a period of slavery for almost 1,000 years,
Yes.
800 years of barbaric Islamic domination and 200 years of British domination and slavery.
Mm.
So you never ever want to go there. And whatever you have to do, you
That
have to be a strong nation.
that slavery actually still lingers in our minds, and even the progeny, who call their progeny actually progeny of the rulers. So
Hmm.
it lingers in their mind too. So they are still at it. So we are going to enslave India once again. It's okay, sir. I am moving to my next question. My next question is, how far should India go in aligning with the US, especially in countering China? What's your take, sir?
Well, we have a strategic partnership with the United States. The defense cooperation has increased over the last 25 years. We are buying more equipment from United States, but this does not mean everything is hunky-dory. United States has different strategic objectives and different geography. India has a different geography and different strategic objectives. As far as they can be harmonized without having a cost on India's national priorities and India's strategic goals, it is fine to work with United States, but you cannot have alliance with United States. You cannot be in military alliance with United States because then you become just a vassal state. India has this concept of strategic independence and strategic autonomy. Uh, you can look even with this issue of Ukraine war, India and United States have taken different steps and different postures. So yes, as long as it helps us to counterbalance China, it is good, but it does not mean that India should allow United States to use India's shoulder to fire at China.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between, let's say, India and a member of NATO alliance, because those are treaty-bound partners.
Yeah.
We are not a treaty-bound partner with United States. We just have strategic partnership. We are not a formal ally. And in the introduction, you had talked about Indo-Pacific Alliance. I would like to clarify for the viewers, there's no Indo-Pacific Alliance. What is there is called Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which is just a dialogue. It's not a military alliance. Yes, we are converging and harmonizing some activities that are not necessarily in defense sector. Uh, Quad is also working in vaccine development and, critical mineral sort of development, rare earths, all that kind of thing. So it is much more inclusive, not just a military alliance. And as far as India's policy is concerned, they will never enter into any kind of military alliance against any country or with any country, because that impinges on national strategic independence. So you do have a situation that we work with United States, but there are irritants also, as I talked about, delay in supply of GE engines
Yeah.
for Mark II Tejas version. So we are suffering because of that. And we should not be in that kind of situation. So we should continue to work with all other countries that are defense partners, whether it is Israel or France, or for that matter, Russian Federation.
Yes.
Meanwhile, we should continue to work upon our own independent military industrial complex. But yes, we will have to continue to work with other countries in order to deal with possibility of threat from China.
Yes. So, does India's humanitarian stance align with geopolitical ambitions? The way we became the vaccine mitra and we supply free vaccines to so many countries. So, what's your comment on this? How do you view this? So, can you just?
I, I think when you look at geopolitics, you have different kinds of powers. You have soft power, you have hard power, and then you have smart power. So you have to use every tool in the toolbox
Yeah.
to further national geopolitical interests. Hard power alone is not able to achieve anything. You saw that what was the fate of United States in Vietnam,
Yeah.
was the fate of United States in Afghanistan
Yeah.
with Taliban, and what was the fate of United States in Iraq, where
Yeah.
they were pretty much driven out. Okay, and that is the fallacy of using hard power alone. In contrast to that, India, harped on soft power for decades,
Yeah.
you know, without having any hard power. You need to have a good, nice, harmonious combination of both hard power, soft power, and smart power.
Yes.
In that process, you need to build up alliances, where by promoting sustainable development. I think Vaccine Maitri Abhiyan was appreciated by a lot of countries. There were prime ministers of various countries that went on to United Nations General Assembly and thanked India openly. There was Prime Minister of, I think, Papua New Guinea, who touched the feet of the Prime Minister thanking him for the help during uh, Wuhan virus pandemic when nobody was helping them with vaccines. India helped them with vaccines. So yes, these are good gestures, good humanitarian gestures. And as far as Indian Ocean region is concerned, India is a security provider, but also humanitarian assistance provider. Anything has happened from tsunami of 2005 to other crises, India has stepped up to the plate and provided humanitarian assistance that used to be prerogative of Western countries only in the past. But India is doing that. India has also, mastered into mass evacuations of Indian nationals from zones of conflict because of the goodwill we have. And in that process, we have not only evacuated Indian nationals, Indian diaspora from zones of conflict, but we have also evacuated people, citizens of Nepal or Sri Lanka, or for that matter, some of the Western nations. So
Yes.
all these things are good humanitarian gestures. We should continue to do that, but that alone is not going to be sufficient. It has to be balanced by increase in our hard power and increase in our economic power. So ultimately, we are talking about improving India's comprehensive national power, CNP.
So with this, I am moving to my final question. I would like to have your comment on India's foreign policy for the past decade, actually. I mean,
Fast.
past decade, this new
Mhm.
government since 2014. See, so what do you think about it? An overview of it, and what is your suggestion to the government in the sphere of foreign policy?
So there is gradual increase in assertive foreign policy. From 2014 to 2019, there was increase in, humanitarian gestures and soft power and that kind of thing without any real change in our foreign policy. I think the articulation and conduct of foreign policy became much more assertive from 2019 onwards.
Yeah,
It also reflected change in the external affairs minister who was heading there.
yeah,
From 2014 to 2019, it was Sushma Swaraj, who was not a domain expert. There was political reason why she was put there so that she does not interfere or throw a political challenge domestically if she was quite active. Let's be very frank about it. She did not have domain expertise in foreign policy. And that's a sad state of affairs. But from 2019 onwards, you have a domain expert who is handling the foreign policy. And by and large, there has been actually much more nuanced and much more assertive foreign policy to the extent that there is consternation in Western nations that India is not actually paying heed to their concerns to the extent they were used to. Because uh, to use a phrase from a very famous political leader, when they were asked to bend, they chose to crawl.
so
India's foreign policy used to be like this,
what
that when the Western powers
and
asked India to
can you
bend,
fix that?
India chose to crawl, and that does not happen anymore. India is self-assertive
Yeah,
and India is steadfast. So that's a very positive thing. I think conduct of foreign policy also requires some more specialization. I would like to see increase in the strength of our IFS officers. Historically, we were stuck at 600 IFS officers, and our foreign policy imprint needs to extend. We had a situation that we did not have our embassies in some countries in Latin America. There was a time 20, 30 years ago, we did not have actually an ambassador in a country like Chile or, and that gave our adversaries some advantage. And even these, like, separatist groups. So they would go and work on these governments where there was no Indian embassy, and exhort them to take anti-India postures, especially the Khalistani terrorists and all. Now there has been some increase in the strength of IFS. I
Yeah.
think that trend needs to continue. I am all for lateral entry into IFS because although the IFS as an organization is very jealously protective of their own turf, but there is need and you can actually have lateral entry from academia. You can have lateral entry from armed forces to give a boost to our military diplomacy. Yes, there's a military attaché in every embassy, but you need to, the short service commission officers who retire from armed forces in 5 years' time, 5 years of service or 7 years of service, whatever the duration is currently, by competitive examination, they need to be given some role in IFS. So you have to improve the tools that you are going to use for furthering your national interests. That needs to be done. We need to be very clear. And the only supreme thing should be the national interests, not the rhetoric. I am all for, humanitarian assistance and working with the global south. But
Yes.
when push comes to shove, when your country is in danger, none of these countries come. So there has to be some accountability and reciprocity. So I was very happy to see that India blocked the entry of countries like Pakistan and Turkey in possibly expanded BRICS alliance or BRICS plus.
Yeah.
And I would like you to remember what happened when India put the application for membership of NSG, which were the countries that were hyperactive in blocking India's entry into NSG or India's membership into NSG, or for that matter, United Nations Security Council expansion. Pakistan has been on forefront. So why would you allow Pakistan to join a platform where it will continue to do the same thing? So
Yeah.
it was very well done, blocking Pakistan's entry into BRICS Plus alliance. I wish this was the same story in SCO, but it did not happen because China maneuvered to give Pakistan entry along with
Yeah.
India
We are
at the
running
same
out of time, sir. Running short of time. I have 1 minute left. So I think I would like to wind up and then we'll meet up again. Uh, So thank you, Dr. Adityanjee, for sharing your valuable perspective on India's foreign policy and international positioning. Your insight give us a deeper understanding of choices, risk, and opportunity India faces in its pursuit of global influence and security. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave your thoughts on India's foreign policy in the comment section. Stay tuned for more discussion that bring us closer to the pulse of geopolitics and geoeconomics and India's dynamic role on the world stage. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious. Thank you so much, Dr. Adityanji, for giving your so valuable time and enlightening us. So we are very obliged to you, actually.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Saina, for inviting me on your newly revamped platform called Global Focus.
Time's up.